back in Singapore. 1997, is that the last time? So it's not so bad, only about, what, 16 years? So every 16 years I'm coming back. But it's wonderful to be here and to see all your faces. I was in Prague yesterday and saw the Baha'is there, and then I was in San Diego 2 days before that and saw the Baha'is. And everywhere I go, the Baha'is are just so wonderful and so warm and so loving. And the only way that we're going to change the world is to be as loving as possible to everybody. Because it's the power of unity that will change the world. The power of love is what will change the world. So I'm so happy to do this. And traveling is a really exciting way to really realize the power that this faith has released. So, Elango put in my program Science and Religion, which wasn't one of the talks that I normally give in my summer schools, but I'm glad you did, because it's an exciting subject. And how many of you are interested in the concept of science and religion and their relationship? Are you interested in this subject? I first got interested in it when I was about 3 or 4 years old. And you think that that's funny, but it's actually true, because when I was growing up, my great-grandfather, who Elango did not mention, my great-grandfather, George McCready Price, was one of the most famous creationists in America. In fact, he was one of the founders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So if you look him up in Wikipedia, you'll find that he and Ellen White started the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the late 19th century. And he spent his whole life trying to refute Darwin, you know, the theory of evolution, because the church was against it. And he got something like 6 or 7 university degrees in anthropology and sociology and archaeology and so on, and spent his whole life. And today he's considered what they call the father of scientific creationism. Scientific creationism is a form. Creationism means that we don't believe there was evolution, we believe that God created the world. But before my great-grandfather, creationism was religious-based. They proved it by the Bible or the Old Testament. That's what they call religious creationism. Scientific creationism is where they try to prove it as a science, even though really they believe it because of religion. You understand that? And so he was very influential, and he spent his whole life fighting and arguing with Charles Darwin. When they had a trial in the United States in the 1920s called the monkey trial, has anyone heard of that? The Scopes monkey trial, the most famous trial in American history about Darwin. My great-grandfather was a witness for the prosecution. He was an expert witness to and of course they lost, just so you know. Anyway, so I was born like this. And so when I was about, I can't remember exactly, but I'm going to say 6. Yeah. When I was 6 years old, my mother had a baby, a new brother for me. Okay, a little bit. And the baby was going to be named George, after this great famous George McCready Price. And so she went to the hospital, and the baby was born deformed. Now when I say deformed, it wasn't actually deformed, but it was a kind of dwarf called a hypopituitary dwarf, which means it was very, very tiny and very small, but the head was full size, and the legs were full size, and the body was just smaller than it looked like an insect, okay? It looked very strange. My mother screamed on the operating table, and the doctor killed the baby, because that's what they used to do in those days. They just killed it. They sent my mother away and killed the baby. And this was not the right thing to do, obviously, but this is what happened. So I was waiting that day, and my mother came home and said the baby was horrible, it was funny, it was strange, and they killed it. And so I thought this was, you know, very unusual. And it was to be named after George McCready Price. So we immediately knew this is very ironic that this man who was going to be named after a child because he was against evolution, and here an evolutionary defect in the child named by him happened and he killed. Don't you think that's kind of strange? So we thought that was unusual, and then a year or two later he passed away. He was like 100 years old. So he was a very old man, but he passed away. And then when I was born, my mother had another baby, another boy, and they thought it was going to be a girl, but when they went into the hospital, it was a boy. And my father said, what do we name the baby? We can't name it George because we already named the other child George and he's passed away. And now the other George, the old man, has passed away. What do we name it? And my father, he got a smile. He said, we'll name it Darwin. And he smiled and he said, because they're in the next world both now. And they're united, so now we'll name them. Now, if you had named the baby Satan or Devil, it wouldn't have been as bad as naming him Darwin, because we knew in the next world that this George McCready Price, his Darwin Price, to put those two names together. But my father had a sense of humor, and so he named him Darwin Price. Any of you know in Australia, I have a brother, his name is Darwin. And everybody always says, why is your name Darwin? And he has to tell the whole story that I just told you. So when I was only 6 years old, I knew that there was some weird thing going in the world with science and religion. And so when I was first in elementary school, when I was about 6 or 7, when you're very young in school, they make you do a science report. You know how they do that when you're young? First science report ever. And most children, they do it on the rain or the sun or, something very obvious. And my mother said, why don't you do it on Hypopituitary dwarf? Because that was how your brother was. And so I told the teacher, I said, what do you want to do your report on? Do you want to do the sun? Do you want to do the sky? I said, I want to do Hypopituitary dwarf. And the teacher didn't even know what that was. But anyway, to do it, my mother had to take me to the library, and I had to read about this Hypopituitary dwarf, and I found out that they are perfectly normal, just very small. They're perfectly normal. And in the old days, they would raise them, and everybody loved them because they matured as an adult by the age of about 6 or 7. So when they were like 6 or 7, they were already fully an adult. And by the time they were 18 or 19, they died. They had a short life. But they were very beloved. And in Europe, they have a thing called a troll. Have you ever seen a troll, a little tiny? A troll is a Hypopituitary dwarf. And they were worshipped in these communities and loved, and they were smart and so on. And so I read all these reports and stories, and I realized they killed my brother only because he didn't look the way they wanted him to look. But they didn't have to kill him, you see? And so then I was very sad that I lost a brother because doctors killed him. So I learned very soon that why is religion and science doing these crazy things? My grandfather did, my great-grandfather did crazy, and science doing these things. So I learned this very early in life. I became a Baha'i when my mother became a Baha'i when I was about 9 or 10 years old. And I don't know how many of you know much about the Baha'i faith, but the head of the Baha'i faith, who was the great-grandson of Baha'u'llah in the 1940s, his name was Shoghi Effendi, he had to write a document to give to the Israeli government that explained what the Baha'i faith was. So he wrote a summary of the Baha'i faith. It was about 6 or 7 or 8 paragraphs. And it was also used later that he submitted it to the United Nations. So it was his summary of what the Baha'i faith was. And it begins with one sentence, which says the Baha'i faith is 6 things. 6 things. So I'm thinking if the head of the Baha'i faith, the grandson of the great-grandson of the founder of the Baha'i faith, if they say these are the first things to mention, I think we should know what they are. So I'm going to mention to you what they are, and I'm going to ask you if you know. What do you think are the first 6 things? He says the revelation proclaimed by Baha'u'llah, his followers believe is, and then he names 6 things. Does anyone guess what those 6 are? The first 6 things out of his mouth about what the Baha'i faith is. Who can guess?
The world is but one country.
I'm sorry?
The world is but one country.
Well, he gets to those, but the first 6 things he says is, number 1, he says it's divine in origin. Okay, that's the first. 2, he says all embracing in scope. So first of all, it's divine in origin, it comes from God. 2, it's in all embracing, it covers all the things. 3, he says it's broad in outlook. And so its outlook is very broad. 4, I'm not going to tell you. 5, he said it's humanitarian in its principles. Humanitarian means it's concerned with the welfare of people. Okay? And the sixth, he said, dynamic in the influence it exerts on the hearts and minds of men. So it has an effect on people that is great. Dynamic means has a very great effect on people. So it has an effect on people. It comes from God. It's all-embracing. It's broad in outlook, and it's humanitarian. It's concerned with the welfare of people. But what was that fourth one I missed? Can anyone tell me? Scientific in method. It's scientific in method. In the very first sentence of his statement of what the Baha'i faith is, he says it's scientific in method. Now, do you know any other religion that says they're scientific in method? It's not very common. Even amongst Baha'is, if I ask Baha'is, you can only say 6 things about the Baha'i faith. What is in your first list of 6? How many of you would put scientific in method? Is that right? So obviously, Shoghi Effendi, the head of the Baha'i faith, has an idea about what this religion is. It's a scientific religion, and what does that mean by that? So anyway, let's leave that and move on. I'm going to read you a statement from Abdul Baha, in which he was speaking to the Baha'is in the United States, but this was in a public meeting in Washington, D.C. It was in a church, actually. And he said this, and I'm going to leave part of it blank, just to see if you could guess what it is. He says, the virtues of humanity are many. Okay, so what is a virtue? Yes, that's very good qualities. He says, the virtues of humanity are many. But blank, in other words, I'm not saying what it is, but blank is the most noble of them all. Okay, so now we have to guess what is the most noble of all the virtues. Because there's many virtues of mankind, but blank, one virtue is the most noble of them all. Do you want me to? I'll read the rest of it. Maybe you can guess what is this blank. The virtues of humanity are many, but blank is the most noble of them all. The distinction which man enjoys above and beyond the station of the animal is due to this paramount virtue. It is a bestowal of God. It is not material, it is divine. Blank is the effulgence of the sun of reality. Anyone want to guess? You can all have your own guess. What do you think is?
Consciousness.
Consciousness, okay. Consciousness. Who else wants another guess?
Intellect.
I'm sorry?
Intellect.
Intellect, good. What's another one?
Thoughtfulness.
Thoughtfulness, yes.
Humanity.
Humanity, good. These are all good, aren't they? Anyone have any other guesses?
Rational mind.
I'm sorry?
Rational mind.
Rational mind, kind of similar. Yes. What do you think?
Knowledge.
Knowledge, yes. Anyone have any other guesses? Most people say love, kindness. Do you want me to read it to you?
Yes.
This time I'm going to read the blank. The virtues of humanity are many, but science is the most noble of them all. Now you could have guessed that, couldn't you? Science is the most noble of them all. The distinction which man enjoys above and beyond the station of the animal is due to this paramount virtue. Now a lot of people don't even think science is a virtue.
Exactly.
It tricks you, because Abdul Baha explains that science is a virtue. And he says it is not material, it is divine. It is a bestowal of God. Science is, in other words, the thing that primarily distinguishes man from the animal, the thing, the reason you get up in the morning and eat bacon and eggs, and the pig is not eating you and the chicken isn't eating you, the difference between you and the animals is due to this virtue. Think how many things an animal can do that's better than we can do. Physically, would you agree? There's some animals that can see better, there's some animals that can run faster, there's animals that can do almost everything good. Go to a circus, you can see the animals are better than us at everything. Isn't that right? And even in intelligence, they have been measuring animals, and they're very, very intelligent. Some are more intelligent than many of the people I know. I'm joking. Well, I'm not joking. It's true. They can communicate over hundreds of miles. They can predict earthquakes. I mean, in other words, there's many things that animals can do that we can't do. But there is something that the human mind possesses, which is an emanation from God, a bestowal from God, he says, and he calls it science. It's some kind of faculty. Now, when you said the rational faculty and when you said thoughtfulness, I think that's all part of what Abdul Baha is saying. Because Baha'u'llah also said that the greatest emanation from God, the greatest gift of God to man was his rational faculty, this scientific thing. Now, I want to ask you, how relevant is religion in today's world? How relevant is religion in today's world? What role does religion play? In Singapore, is religion playing a very big role? In government, in society, in law? Does it?
Not much.
Not much? Okay.
Only lately.
Because this is a very interesting thing. Science has plays a very big role in the world. Would you agree to that? It affects commerce, it affects industry, it affects architecture, it affects agriculture, it affects in every way. Science is playing a very big role. You have to agree. And it has been doing so for about 150 years. In the last 150 years, religion has played less and less of a role, particularly in the Western world, in Europe and the United States. And you could actually say that the 20th century was an experiment by humanity in what we call a materialistic interpretation of the world. Gradually, the world has become more and more materialistic. We're concerned more with material things than we ever have probably in 1,000 years. Would you agree?
Yeah.
And as a result, science has taken a dominant role. Now, the civilizing process of mankind had always been exerted through the role that religion played. Religion has the ability to create morality, but over a period of about a century, gradually religion has been taken out of the world. So we could call this an experiment. I can't remember exactly the year, but it was in the 1880s that Nietzsche coined the phrase, "God is dead." Do you remember that? Have you ever read that? God is dead. And that has become a dominant philosophical concept in the last 150 years or so since he said it. In fact, in the late 60s, Time magazine printed the cover, it was just black with words, "Is God dead?" Because it was believed that the world now, the forces of history, can all be controlled by governments who will give the people better housing, better conditions, better health. In other words, that's what we're concerned with now. Let's make everybody materially better off in whatever part of the world, whether it be in the East or the West, and somehow that is going to make people happy. That is going to bring happiness. Now, how many of you are happy? Not very many are happy. Okay, this is a very interesting thing because they do studies every year measuring happiness, and they also have psychological tests. And people are less and less happy every single year as we get more and more materially comfortable. And I learned this way back when I was in Australia in the 1970s. I was working for this singer, Billy Field. He's very wealthy. Family is a millionaire. And he went to a school called Cranbrook, which was the school that had the wealthy millionaire children in Sydney. And I would go to the parties and socialize with those people. And then for 3 months every year, I would go up to Papua New Guinea in the highlands, where they had Baha'i youth teaching and service projects. I did it for 3 or 4 years, 17, 18, 19, 20 years old. And so I'd spend 8 months a year with millionaire kids, and I would spend 3 months a year up in the highlands of Papua New Guinea. Now, these millionaire kids were the most miserable, unhappy people you ever met. Their lives were so unhappy, they were on drugs, they were having problems with this, they were fighting with their parents. I mean, life was not happy. And then I would go to the highlands of New Guinea. They have nothing. They have no clothes. Okay? Have you ever been to the highlands?
Yeah.
They have no clothes, believe me. And they have about 100 to 300 words in their language. They don't need very many words because they don't need a word for ocean. There's no ocean in the mountain. You understand? They don't need very many words. But what do you think they do from morning till sunset? They laugh. They smile. They tease you. You go down to the river to wash, and they sneak and steal your clothes. and then you come out there giggling. I mean, You think that's funny, but you know, they just, whatever they can make happiness, wherever they are, anytime they are. And I cried just thinking about their face. And so one time I was up there in New Guinea after being in Australia, and I said to myself, you know, there's no correlation between happiness and material things. There's no correlation. If there was a correlation, it would be the opposite. That's what I was saying. And so I realized that this experiment that the world has gone through since 1882, when Nietzsche said God is dead, to gradually what we call secularize the world, secularize government and so on, has not really produced the happiness that we thought it would do. Because somehow we do not realize that we are both material beings and spiritual beings. And that we can't look after just one and ignore the other. That we are a spiritual being and a material being. If I were to take you right now, your physical body, scientists have worked it out, that if we take and we wanted to build your body, it would only take about 12 main elements. So I need a certain amount of water, I can't remember, it's like several buckets, and I need a certain amount of this, a certain amount of that. And when one scientist worked it out, it's just, you know, hydrogen, it's very simple elements. The human body, you could buy at a hardware store for about 98 cents. That's what the originated scientists calculated in the late 1950s. And some other scientists worked out later that it probably had increased to about $2 or $3. Your physical body is made up of $2 or $3 of material. And the material in your body are the most common elements in creation. You know, these are all carbon, and these are things that are very inexpensive and common, and they're everywhere in everything. So how is it that these elements, basically there's 12 elements, that are everywhere in the rocks, in the ocean, in the water, how did they all decide to get together and become you? And how do they stay together and be you? Does anyone know? Nobody really knows. But the point is, you'd have to agree that you, what is you, is not that 98 cents worth of physical material. You have to agree that that's not you. You are some kind of consciousness, some kind of something. Whether you believe in the soul or the spirit or some religious concept, you have to agree that there's something that is different to your physical body, that's you. And the great French philosopher René Descartes was the first to identify that there is a duality. We call this Cartesian duality, because he said he was thinking about the answer to questions. And he said, as he was thinking, he said, I think, therefore I am. You know, this is considered the greatest philosophical concept, because he realized that there was something in him that wasn't his body. And we call this Cartesian duality. It means there's both a physical body and there is a, whatever you want to call it. You can call it spiritual or a consciousness or whatever, but it's there. And right now you live in two worlds. You live in the physical world and you live in the spiritual world. You live in both worlds. How much time do you spend looking after the physical part of your life? Out of the 24 hours a day, how much time do you spend? A lot. 23 and a half? I don't know. So we don't look so much after the spiritual side. The harmony of science and religion primarily has to do with bringing our life into balance. Balancing the spiritual and the material. Not that there's anything wrong with the material world. There's nothing wrong with it. But it's wrong to be imbalanced. And so we are told in the Baha'i concept that the physical world is not something that you have to forsake or get rid of or become like an ascetic. You know what an ascetic is? That is someone that says we have to eliminate the physical world, go live in a cave or live in a monastery or don't enjoy life or don't enjoy physical pleasures. We don't believe that. We just believe that there needs to be a certain balance of the material and the spiritual. Right now, in the world, we are leaning too far towards the material. And science has flourished. Now, everybody knows that anything that you really want to do, there's no law that can stop you from doing it. Is that right? Maybe in Singapore you can. But not in most parts of the world, because Singapore, the law is... But if you really didn't want to do something, there's no law that can make you do it. Isn't that right? This proves that the basis of society is moral, not legal. It's morality that is the basis of society. And throughout history, religion has always induced morality and given stability to society. Today we have a group of people that we call the New Atheists. Is anyone familiar with the New Atheists? Go on the internet, Google, Wikipedia, like Lango does, type New Atheists, and you'll find that there's a whole group of people that are scientists. Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Victor Stenger, Michael Sherman, Lawrence Krauss, Bill Maher. I don't know if you know all these people. And they're writing books now, and they started around 2003, 2004. And some of them are selling in the millions, 5 million or more, something like that. And they call themselves the New Atheist Movement because they believe that it's no longer good enough just to be an atheist and to passively allow other people to follow religion. This is a new philosophy. I'll read you. They say religion is not something, I'm going to read you the exact terminology. This is a statement from one of the New Atheists. Religion should not simply be tolerated, but should be countered, criticized, and exposed by rational argument wherever its influence arises. Okay, in other words, it's not good enough that I just don't believe in God, but they can believe. No, I have to go out and do everything I can to stop religion, to stop people believing in it. Because religion, they say, is the problem. Religion is the problem in the world. They look at radical or fundamental Islam and what it's doing, or radical or fundamental Christianity or Judaism or Hinduism. And in every country in the world, they say religion is causing this problem, that problem, this problem, that problem. How many of you agree that religion is causing a lot of problems in the world today? Everybody raise their hand, of course. Religion causes a problem. So they look at this and they say, that's the problem. So let's go out and let's attack religion and let's disprove it scientifically. And you would have to agree that religion is like a double-edged sword. It can do great things and it can do bad things. Would you agree? Okay, so this is a very important thing. We can only learn the power of religion by studying history. Because in certain periods of history, religion has had a very positive force. Now, in the early part of the 20th century, there was a certain style of history, we used to call it meta-history. It was a form of world history that wasn't just, it was a history that's covered all civilizations. And some of the more famous writers in this style were Arnold Toynbee or Will Durant. And you know some of these writers? And they would study all of civilizations. Now, if you look at any of these writers, maybe in the 30s, 40s, 50s, up to the 60s, they put religion at the primary point in their understanding of human evolution, because when they were studying cultures and civilizations, they found that there was never a civilization that ever arose that didn't begin with religion. That always they did. So they found this. I'll read you a statement from Will Durant's 11-volume book called The Story of Civilization. Has anyone seen that book, The Story of Civilization? It's 11 volumes. So I remember I was growing up, everybody had it on their bookshelves. But nobody read it, but they had it. It looked really good. And so it says, but open it up, and it says this. He said, civilizations begin with religion and stoicism. They end with skepticism and unbelief and the undisciplined pursuit of individual pleasure. He says, he studied every civilization known to man. He said they always begin with religion. They end with skepticism and unbelief and the undisciplined pursuit of pleasure. Okay, what right now do you think we're doing? We have an undisciplined pursuit of pleasure. So the point is that if you read these writers, you find out that religion is like bathwater. That there's a baby in it and then it gets very dirty. Religion gets very dirty. And then finally, somebody says, throw out the whole bathwater. Because they don't even see the baby in the bathwater, if you understand what I mean. Have you ever had a bathwater so dirty you couldn't see the baby? That would be pretty bad, wouldn't it? Okay, but that's what religion is doing today. So when I read these books by these New Atheists, by Richard Dawkins and so on, I agree with most of what they say. I agree with most of what they say. And the reason I agree is that they are seeing all the impurities in current religious practice And it's very similar to what I see Abdu'l-Baha and Baha'u'llah saying in like the Kitab-i-Iqan, where he's also criticizing the way in which religion is right. In other words, religion is something that becomes impure and periodically needs to be purified. And as a result, I respect these people. I feel like going to them and saying, the God you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. They don't believe in a concept of God that is not genuine. And so as I thought about this, I realized that we have to first redefine religion before we can bring religion into harmony with science and reason. Right now, 85% of all physicists are atheists, and 79% of all biological scientists are atheists. It's the highest percentage ever in the history as far as we know. In other words, virtually all of them are that. And I said we must redefine religion because the kind of religion they don't believe in, I don't believe in. So I went into the Baha'i teachings to identify what makes true religion. What identifies a true religion? And I found that there are 7 principles. And so today I want to describe for you what I call the 7 principles of true religion. The good side of the sword. The bad side is very easy to see. The good side of the sword. So now we're going to go into the 7 signs of true religion. And then later on we'll discuss it and see how we can find them. If I go too long, just stop. If I don't get to the end of the 7, that's okay. Or we can take a break if you like at any time. But let's do the first sign of a true religion. And that is that religion must be relevant. Religion must be relevant to the needs of the day and the age in which people live. It has to be related. In other words, if religion is not relevant to your needs and what you are doing, or the world and what they're doing today, what good is it? I don't care if it was relevant for somebody 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago. It must be relevant to the day in which we live. And it must have some meaning to your life, to what you need. Would you agree? This is the first principle of religion. Baha'u'llah said, every age has its own needs. Be anxiously concerned with the needs of your age. There was a story in Tennessee about a farmer. His horse got sick. And he went next door to the farmer next door. He said to his next door neighbor, he said, when your horse got the worms, what did you give him? He said, I gave him castor oil, half a quart a day for 2 weeks. He says, well, thank you very much. And so he goes back home and he gives his horse a half quart of castor oil every day for 2 weeks. And at the end of 2 weeks, his horse died. So he goes back to his neighbor. He says, I gave my horse castor oil every day for 2 weeks and he died. And the neighbor said, really? So did mine. So the point is, we need to ask ourselves, is this something that is working? Is it something that's doing something that suits our needs? And this is the first principle of religion, that it must be relevant to the age in which it appears. For this reason, we are told that religion is something which must constantly be renewed. Because in the same way that a child grows, or you understand these analogies, the needs become different. So I am not going to treat my 25-year-old son the same way I treated him when he was 3 years old. I'm not going to put diapers on my 25-year-old son, or whatever it is, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to be doing something that's relevant for his needs at this time. So that is the first element of true religion. The first sign of true religion, it must be relevant to the needs of the age in which it lives. The second principle of true religion is it must be in harmony with science. It must be in harmony with science and reason. Because not everybody is a scientist, but how many of you have reason? We all have reason. Religion must be in harmony with science and reason. Now, Abdu'l-Baha, when he traveled throughout the United States, he mentioned a lot of Baha'i teachings. But he could have mentioned anything, because he knew everything. He always selected certain principles. And go back and read the book, Promulgation of Universal Peace, in which he speaks to the public. And he almost always mentioned this principle. I'll read you one statement. He says, when religion, shorn of its superstitions, traditions, and unintelligent dogmas, shows conformity with science, then will there be a great unifying, cleansing force in the world, which will sweep before it all wars, disagreements, discords, and struggles. And then will mankind be united in the power of the love of God. So he says, if religion could get rid of its superstitions, its traditions, and unintelligent dogmas, and come into conformity with science, if religion could figure out a way to do that, he says it will be a great unifying, cleansing force in the world. Has that happened? Yet? Has religion shed all its traditions, all its superstitions, all its dogmas? Has it done that? No. That's why the new atheists are attacking religion. Because they say religion is anti-science. Religion is anti-unity. Religion is pro, discrimination. Do you understand what they're saying? So Abdul Baha is saying, until religion sheds all that and becomes in conformity with science. See, a lot of people say, oh, harmony of science and religion, that means that the scientists have to become more religious. But Abdul Baha is talking more about what the religious people have to do to move in this direction. So religion must be in harmony with science and reason. If it is not scientifically rational, how can somebody believe it in this day and age? Would you agree? Now, you may say, well, hold on. You can't prove the existence of God, or you can't prove the existence of the soul, or you can't. Do you know people like that say that? How many of you think that yourself? You can't prove it scientifically. Would you agree? And so this is a hard thing. In fact, many scientists, they use what we call the Easter Bunny argument. They always